Kahn, in his On Thermonuclear War in 1960, calmly considers whether or not a death toll of 50 million human beings would be an acceptable, quote-unquote, statistic to ensure that democracy prevails. Jordan Maxwell and some other scholars who study the astrological cycles and chart what these evilarchies are up to, and once you know what they're into, then you can sort of follow what they're up to and get ahead of the game. We come to understand that we're in what we call the Saturnalian period, or what they call the Saturnalian period, when chaos and debauchery is permissible. We're in what the Hindus call the Kal age, and what also might be called the Dionysian age, when all forms of debauchery and depravity are let loose upon the world. This is the period when all kinds of virtue and morality, as the ancient texts were saying, are thought of as vices. Julian Huxley, in the preface to Brave New World, says, as political and economic freedom diminishes, sexual freedom tends to compensatingly increase, and the dictator will do well to encourage that freedom, in conjunction with the freedom to daydream under the influence of dope, movies, and radio. It will help to reconcile his subjects to their servitude, which is not their fate. In Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, he writes, sensual pleasures programmed into people as infants through hypnopedic messages repeated thousands of times as they slept. These messages encouraged sexual promiscuity, attendance at mass entertainments, and the ingestion of drugs for any and every unpleasant feeling or little distress. You know, the idea here is not to have people actually have more sex, but to engender frustration that they're not able to. In George Orwell's 1984, An Animal Farm, he says, the past is completely eliminated. History is revised. Books are destroyed. Without print media, there is no evidence that anything has been different. Even keeping diaries is forbidden. People are expected to absorb and accept the new information delivered by the television sets, even if it directly contradicts the news of a month ago. Since it is impossible to prove the contradiction, it is useless to try to resist. And is this not the exact situation we find ourselves in today, where people not only believe the media, but in believing it, they're filled with contradictions? But who stands up to right those contradictions? If something on the media repeats and repeats and repeats the same message, eventually 80% of the population just blithely accept it. In the book Being Human, we read, when faced with a life-threatening situation, the reptilian hindbrain, the most primitive part of the human brain, switches off all activity except that which keeps us alive. It sends the subconscious message, do not move, breathe, or blink, or you will be seen and attacked. But as Hesiod, and the ancient Greek playwright in 8th century BC, he writes, the gods keep mankind ignorant of the ways of living, else one would do enough in one day to last a year. In Job 12, the Bible, we read, he increaseth the nations and destroyeth them. He enlargeth the nations and straighteneth them again. In Job 12, he taketh away the heart of the chief of the people of the earth, and causeth them to wander in a wilderness where there is no way. They grope in the dark, without light, and him maketh to stagger like a drunken man. So we have it in the age of Dionysus, the Kal age. And who are the philosophers who brought this about? Well, Thomas Malthus, in his own words, says, in his essay on population, instead of recommending cleanliness to the poor, we should encourage contrary habits. We should crowd more people into the houses and court the return of the plague. But above all, we should reprobate specific remedies for ravaging diseases. And those benevolent but mistaken men who have thought that they were doing a service to mankind by projecting schemes for the total extirpation of particular disorders. If by these and similar means the annual mortality were increased, we might possibly, every one of us, marry at the age of puberty, and yet few be absolutely starved. When we come to eugenics and Charles Darwin, Darwin He writes in his own words, "Excepting in the case of man himself, hardly anyone is so ignorant as to allow his worst animals to breed." Eugenics, which was selective breeding or racial hygiene, is not, however, a Nazi or a German phenomenon, but a British and American one. Hundreds of people were systemically and legally sterilized in the United States from 1907 on. The most influential eugenicist was Sir Francis Galton, the cousin of Charles Darwin. He was an honorary president of the Eugenics Society for several years. His successor was Major Leonard Darwin, son of Charles Darwin, and it was he who strongly promoted the eradication of the unfit. The first U.S. Eugenics Society was headed by Averell Harriman's mother. It was also funded by the royals, as was the entire Harriman dynasty. Ernst Rudin, Hitler's eugenics expert and chief engineer, was a guest of Mrs. Harriman in America before the advent of the Second World War. In 1905, Dr. Ernst Rudin founded a German eugenics society called the Society for Racial Hygiene. Later he changed the name, adding the word suggested by Francis Galton, the Society for Racial Hygiene, that is, eugenics. In 1925, Leonard Darwin wrote an article for the Journal of the Eugenics Society, the Eugenics Review, pushing the idea of locking up everyone whose genes might be considered defective. To save the human race, he said, force or compulsion would be necessary in many cases. He promoted a policy that he called segregation, but he did not mean segregating whites from blacks. He meant separating the fit from the unfit. Compulsion is now permitted if applying to criminals, lunatics, and mental defectives, and this principle must be extended to all who, by having offspring, would seriously damage future generations, he argued. The leaders of the progressive movement in Britain also supported negative eugenics. The people who had founded the London School of Economics, that's Sidney and Beatrice Webb, were also leaders of the Fabian Society. The Fabian Society later became one of Britain's major political parties, the Labour Party. As early as 1909, the Fabians, led by the Webbs, said, "What we as eugenicists have got to do is to scrap the old Poor Law with its indiscriminate relief of the destitute as such, and replace it by an intelligent policy of so altering the social environment as to discourage or prevent the multiplication of those irrevocably below the national minimum of fitness." In 1930, a Fabian leader, Archibald Church, introduced a bill for eugenic sterilization. So here we have the Fabians, here we have top politicians, here we have the founder of evolution theory, the elites of British society, deciding who will live and who will not, and the manner in which they will administer the torture to the unfit. The Fabian Society itself was founded in 1883 and played a catalytic role, preaching the inevitability of gradualness in the movement towards a socialist society, taking their name from the Roman warrior Fabius, who learned to wait patiently before striking a fatal blow against Hannibal. In America, John Foster Dulles, Senator and Secretary of State under Eisenhower, has this to say: "It is only by eliminating the lower members of the human race that the higher average is maintained." And Jacques Cousteau, UNESCO courier, on November 1991 said, "The United Nations goal is to reduce population selectively by encouraging abortion, forced sterilization, and control human reproduction, and regards 2/3 of the human population as excess baggage, with 350,000 people to be eliminated per day." And the master of them all, Bertrand Russell, in his Impact of Science on Society, had this to say: "At present, the population of the world is increasing at about 58,000 per diem. War so far has had no very great effect on this increase, which continued throughout each of the world wars. War has hitherto been disappointing in this respect, but perhaps bacteriological war may prove effective. If a Black Death could spread throughout the world in every generation, survivors could procreate freely without making the world too full. The state of affairs might be unpleasant, but what of it?" We have Prince Philip, quoted in the Deutsche Presse Agentur in August 1988, said, "In the event I am reborn, I would like to return as a deadly virus in order to contribute something to solve overpopulation. Now, the Institute of Human Virology, we read that according to top pharmacologist Dr. Robert B. Strecker, MD, PhD, the leading scientist of the project, that AIDS virus was created at Fort Detrick, but was based on research first conducted at the Lebedev Institute near Moscow, which was founded by the world's leading virologist, Gurevich. The number of those infected doubles every month. Over 23 million Americans are already affected. In the Strecker Memorandum, in the 30s and 40s, the Public Health Service openly experimented and monitored black men infected with syphilis in Tuskegee, Alabama. Even after penicillin was discovered, these men remained infected and were not treated. Hence, their wives and sons were likewise infected. These incidents are recorded in detail in the book Bad Blood by James Jones. Between 1959 and 1970, there were over 300 biological experiments conducted on U.S. citizens unbeknownst to them. The extent of the program is revealed in the book A Higher Form of Killing by Paxman and Harris. That's from Dr. Robert Strecker's The Strecker Memorandum. Now here it is on DVD. This Dr. Robert Strecker, conclusively proves that AIDS was vector-borne, that AIDS was a man-made designer disease to create havoc in the world, exactly according to the policies of Bertrand Russell and Aldous Huxley and his coterie. This is absolute compulsory viewing. The Strecker Memorandum by Dr. Robert Strecker. He was one of the first people to work on the AIDS virus and knows everything there is to know about it. In The Final Revolution, Aldous Huxley says, "It seems to me perfectly in the cards that a euphoric drug, far more efficient and less harmful than alcohol, may be produced. And if this should be introduced into every bottle of Coca-Cola, then clearly, as I ventured to point out more than 25 years ago in Brave New World, this would become an incredibly powerful instrument in the hands of a dictator. What is becoming, I think, quite clear now is that dictatorships of the future probably will not be based on terror, as the dictatorships of Hitler and Stalin. Terror is an extremely wasteful, stupid, and inefficient method of controlling people. In Brave New World, the distribution of this mysterious drug, which I call the soma, was a plank in the political platform. A Dr. Wright refers to inoculation against smallpox in the British Isles as an ancient practice. And a citizen of Wales, aged 99 years old, states that inoculations have been known and used during his entire lifetime, but that she got smallpox through her inoculation. In Birmingham, England, from 1871 to 1874, there were 7,706 cases of smallpox. Out of these, 6,795 had been vaccinated against the disease. A select committee of the Privy Council convened to inquire into the Vaccination Act of 1867. As 97.5% of those vaccinated died of the disease. Now, Dr. Charles Crichton, in 1884, he is asked to write an article for the Encyclopedia Britannica on vaccination. After much research internationally, he concludes that vaccination constituted a gross superstition. In 1896, Italian professor Carlo Ruta states that vaccination is a worldwide delusion and an unscientific practice with consequences measured today with tears and sorrow without end. Joseph Lister introduced sanitation to the surgery and hospital, but was fiercely resisted by leading surgeons and doctors. The British Medical Association dedicated itself to attacking his name, reputation, and theories. In 1850, a British physician reads paper detailing the microscopic examination of food products, revealing that all food products examined in Britain were adulterated with foreign substances, including chemicals.